what I said is that it is not going to be removed now, which means it will not be removed before the transition is completed. That's what it means. But then we have two laws that have inadvertently made the provision that we should exit by June. So if the committee's work, which will include the representatives of the incoming administration, determine that the removal can be done by June, then the work plan will be designed to exit as of June. But if the determination is that the period needs to be extended, it will mean that we will have, as a country, will have to revisit the Appropriation Act, for example, because the 2023 budget only made provision up to June. So if we're extending beyond June, it means we have to revisit the Appropriation Act and do a supplementary or amend the bill, and also the PIA. We that are here now are going to do the work with the representatives of the incoming administration, and we will exit and leave them to continue with the implementation of the plan. And so there will be an expanded committee so that it is not just a few people's thoughts that will guide the process, that there is sufficient consultation, taking inputs from key stakeholders into the measures that need to be taken.
Just to explain the issue, the NEC is different from the FEC, that's Federal Executive Council. The NEC has a mandate to advise the president concerning economic affairs of Federation, and in particular on measures necessary for the coordination of the economy across the board. That's the planning of various governments of the Federation. It comprises 36 state governors, the governor of the CBN, and other co-opted government officials, unlike FEC, which is a cabinet of the president. So is this some sort of limbo? Is a policy decision clear enough? What does this mean then? Because the government has always insisted, she did that again, that subsidy is not captured for any time after June. Let's speak with Mr. Paul Alaje, senior economist at SPM Professionals. Mr. Alaje, thank you for your patience. I apologize we had to, take on that conversation with Abubakar in Sudan. But thank you for staying with us. I'd like to ask you, listening to the Minister of Finance, following this conversation from perhaps the inception or the earliest time you can remember, what do you make of the latest statement or decision of NEC? Does it look like we're postponing the evil day, or things still look clear for you?
Thank you so very much for having me. Clearly, what the minister has mentioned as a result of the body that met earlier today regarding suspending removal of subsidy is what we have actually expected in our organization. And for weeks now, we have been discussing the same thing along that line in the media. This is because when President Buhari came to office, he had mentioned before the time he came to office that there was no subsidy. When he got to office, he said, yes, there is subsidy, and this subsidy, we need to do something about it. Government had mentioned in 2020 that there was no more subsidy as government will allow floating rate or the market forces to adjudicate price. And we have also said that that will not be the right approach, even though the government has mentioned that subsidy should be removed completely. We strongly believe that without doing the needful, which includes, first of all, making local refinery work, at least 3 to 4 of them, making them work, there will be no reason, there will be no point, there will be no basis for subsidy removal. Yes, it hurts over 3 trillion, and government said what they've made provision for is just from January to June. And after June, Nigerians will have to start buying fuel by themselves. And we've seen a number of strategies government has put in place. What now makes of, how do we now explain the $800 million collected from the international organization to be shared to 10 million households, 50 million Nigerians at an average of $16 per head? What becomes of that? Is it also going to be handed over to the next administration? Another question, perhaps, which I believe authority we need to do something about is what are the options we have on the table? Is to go to the National Assembly, obviously, to ask for additional budget, which most likely will come from borrowing. And I can tell you that the money we are projected to spend in 2023 is not even enough, as we are borrowing significant part of our budget, in fact, beyond what we'll be spending on capital expenditure, is what we'll be borrowing. That is, the entire capital expenditure funding perhaps will be coming from borrowing, and more that we go into recurrent. With additional monies, we will still have to go again into borrowing to finance the remainder, except and unless government is looking at other funding. Unfortunately, what we have in excess crude accounts today is not up to $1 million. And I will repeat it, what we have in excess crude accounts is not up to $1 million. So the next administration, we have a lot to face. And I can tell you that if the next administration, which I believe, of course, they know better, that coming to government and immediately removing subsidy is going to be really, really difficult. And I think government should do the important things, namely make the refineries work. And when I say refinery, I don't mean just one refinery in which a single board of directors will determine the fate of Nigeria. Secondarily, Nigeria already has narrow gauge. This is the time federal government needs to partner with Nigeria Railway Corporation to maximize their narrow gauge and connect it to the rural community, because when subsidy is removed, I know a lot of persons might say that it will not have impact. The truth is that it will have tremendous impact on prices, especially food inflation. And you know what affects food and logistics will certainly affect lives of Nigeria. And lastly, what I think the next administration should do in order to reduce the impact of subsidy, if and when the administration wants to remove subsidy, is to provide for large mass transit system in areas where people are relatively poor compared to where people are relatively rich. It's not necessarily going to be allocated to areas where people are relatively wealthy or they have average economic life. It should be targeted at areas where people are poor. If we don't do this, it will be tantamount to what we attempted in 2012, when people have broken their back as a result of hunger and subsidy removal. That was when we now started discussing palliative. So we have an opportunity. I'm happy that government has returned to the path of reasoning that, one, the timing is wrong, it's too late for subsidy to be discussed at the end of an administration. The new administration should be given the opportunity to decide the future of the country, because the people have said that is the way to go.
Well, some things we know for a fact, or at least we can rely on statements made by, government or incoming government. For the president-elect, for example, he said that no matter how long the protests go on, he will remove subsidy. So his position is quite clear on that. And I think what we're not quite clear on now is the timing. So you seem to be saying that removing it at the start of the administration, which looks like that was a plan originally, to remove it by June, you seem to be saying that that is not a good idea. So when would you propose then? Is it at the end of 1 year? Because he has said clearly that it will be removed. So when will the timing be right, really?
Okay, let me tell you other presidents that have said subsidy will be removed. The military president, Ibrahim Babangida, has said subsidy will be removed. He was unable to remove it. President Buhari, who was both military and civilian president, have said subsidy will be removed. He was unable to remove it. President Obasanjo, military head of state as well as civilian head of state for 8 years, have said subsidy will be removed. He was unable to remove it. And if you check all of these presidents, none of them was able to increase PMS per liter beyond 50 cents at any time. This is because what we deal with in Nigeria is 133 million poor people, and they have to move. Some of the farm outputs that we have that is not even sufficient, we need to move them to urban center. The implication of the removal of subsidy on price of 50 kg rice, it's approximately 2,000 to 3,000 naira extra. So we need to count the cost before we take the decision. But that does not mean subsidy should not be removed. If you ask me, subsidy should be removed. But what must we do? Number one, refineries must be fixed. And if you ask, let me also quickly explain, because of time, what are we subsidizing? Why do we have subsidy today? If we use the exchange rate that was applicable in 2015, official rate was 199 and parallel market rate was 360. If those rates were applicable today, that is, if official rate were to be 199 as against 460 plus that we have today, and parallel market over 750. If we're still using the old rate, the truth is that we will buy PMS at the rate we are buying today, and government will not need to add. By extension, what we are paying for is policy issue. That is poor economic policy, non-communication between fiscal and monetary authority. And I'm happy the president-elect has mentioned, I saw one of the reports that came out yesterday, that is going to ensure, rather, that Fiscal and Monetary Authority work together, and it will also ensure that in the short term that we are going to see reduction of exchange. And I believe maybe he's talking about official rate, reduced to less than 300 naira. And at the end of 4 years, we should be looking at something reduced to less than 200 naira. If that is applicable, then nobody needs to discuss a subsidy. The real problem we have, which is not at the front burner, is quality of naira. People are working to become poorer because of devaluation of this currency. And this was what happened in France many years ago, when almost on a weekly basis, the value of the currency of that country was devalued almost on a weekly basis, you know. So it's a big challenge. Even if you remove subsidy today and we don't have local refinery, and the Central Bank of Nigeria in future says naira is going to be devalued, you know what it means? If you are buying PMS per liter for 500 naira, you need to be ready to pay between 600 to 700 naira for committing no offense. Why? The foundation is not strong. The foundation is to make local refineries work. Government have 4 refineries in their hands. Give them to private sector, retain some unit of shares. I repeat the method you have done with NLNG so that we can produce PMS. Private sector understand that without output, that is without production, without making PMS available, there's practically no way they can make profit. And they want to make profit.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
So their shareholders are also want their board to take some decisions.
So correct me if I'm wrong. We're winding down soon now. You're saying, well, timing is tied to certain things that government must do, which is, I mean, an example you've cited is the refineries must work. So it's not just enough to talk about timing. Those things have to be done before we then talk about timing. Am I correct? Absolutely.
All the precedents is the same mistake that has been made time and again. Make all refineries, or at least 3 out of the 4 government-owned refineries, added to the private refineries, connect the rural community via the train track, which is the narrow gauge, and make provision for the rural environment. I am the first person that will throw my weight behind subsidy. But if you don't do that,
let me get you to do an estimate.
It will be a lie that many people...
Pardon me. Let me get you to do an estimate. So how long would all of that take? How long should it take if the government were to handle this seriously?
Well, I think within 2 to 4 years, government should be able to provide that. But that does not mean we should see sell PMS at the rate we are selling today. There could be a gradual phase-out of the volume of money government is paying, maybe 10%, 20% increase in the price. But to remove it completely will be to say you want to compare Nigeria with Saudi Arabia. President Buhari have said Nigeria has no reason to sell petrol less than Saudi Arabia. But what President did not compare correctly was the minimum wage in Saudi Arabia and the living standard in Saudi Arabia in Nigeria is completely different. I'll give you another instance. United Arab Emirates, an economy that won $400 billion only for population of 10 million people. Nigeria, giant of Africa, an economy arguably worth about $500 billion for over 215 million people. That is why you have more poor people in Nigeria. In fact, it warehouses most poor people in the world compared to where you have United Arab Emirates. So what we need to compare correctly when making economic comparison is not just one side, the supply side, but you need to look at the demand side as well.
A lot to unpack, really. That's why we even need that census to be conducted. Looks like there's no word now from the MPC regarding even when or whether or not it will hold next week. That's talking about the population census. In 30 seconds, Mr. Elijah, let's wind down. How should Nigerians then view subsidy removal? How should they internalize this? How should they approach this conversation?
So the way Nigerians should look at subsidy removal is it is a responsibility on us as people to pay for what we consume, but we also need to protect our future, that if there is policy somersault or mismanagement on the part of government, we will not need to pay. We have not committed any offense for having devaluation of naira. Now we are paying. The way it interprets to me as an economist is that we should pay for that. And some economists have said, let's even devalue to 1,000 naira so that people will not be able to travel abroad for their medical bills. The truth is that the rich we always afford to travel. The poor that we pay 30,000, 40,000 naira, will they be able to transport themselves to their places of work, or we take them completely out of economic cycle?
Big question there, and I think that's a great place to land. Really a lot to unpack, but you have provided a lot of insight, and we'd like to thank you so much, Mr. Paul Alaje, Senior Economist at SPM Professionals. Thank you for your time on the program.
Thank you for having me.